This is my true story. I remarried late in life, thinking companionship would bring me peace. I believed loyalty would follow love, and I gave my new wife everything: comfort, security, and access to the life I had built. But instead of respect, I was met with betrayal that cut deeper than I ever imagined. I discovered her affair with the man who drove my car, the same man I paid to serve this household. And when she told me to sleep on the floor like a dog, I decided her cruelty had to end. You won't believe what I did next. Before I tell you, tell me where you're watching from, and please subscribe so my stories can reach more people. When a man marries late in life, he doesn't marry for passion or the illusions of youth. He marries for peace, for companionship, for someone to share the quiet evenings with when the weight of years has already been carried. That was what I thought I was stepping into when I married my stepwife. I had already built my life. I had already endured the storms of youth, the grind of middle age, the sacrifices of decades spent working, so my name carried weight. All I wanted was to share the comfort of what I had built, the warmth of a home where loneliness would not whisper so loudly at night. In her, I thought I found that. She was younger, yes, but she looked at me with eyes that seemed to understand what loyalty meant. At least, that's what I believed. I gave her the comfort of the house I had built with my own 2 hands, a house that had seen years of my labor etched into every wall and beam. I gave her the car that stood in the driveway, the clothes that filled her wardrobe, the life that many dreamed of but few could hold. I handed her access to my accounts, not because she demanded it, but because I thought trust was the foundation of love. I gave her credit cards with no questions asked, a level of freedom I had never allowed myself, because I wanted her to feel cared for, to never feel the struggles I had endured when I was younger. It wasn't just money or material things I gave her. I gave her my name, my respect, my protection. I stood by her side in front of family and friends, and told them all that this woman was mine, that I had chosen her, that she would be the one to share my days as the years grew quieter. I thought she would look at that gesture not with greed, but with gratitude. I thought she would see my trust as the most valuable gift of all. I even went so far as to include her in every detail of the household finances. Every bill, every account, every investment. I let her have a seat at the table. Some men hold everything close to their chest, fearful of being taken advantage of, but not me. I believed love could not survive without openness. I thought giving her keys to the safe and passwords to the accounts was not foolishness, but proof that I saw her as an equal partner. And with my driver too, I trusted her. He had been with me for years, a man I paid faithfully, a man who owed his livelihood to me. He drove us wherever we needed to go, and I thought nothing of leaving them alone when errands needed to be run. To me, trust was not a weakness. It was the only way to live without suspicion poisoning the mind. I built a life where my stepwife had no reason to feel lack. She wore the finest clothes, traveled in comfort, and lived in a house where she never worried about the roof overhead. She had meals cooked, lights always on, money always available. And I told myself that this life, this ease, this freedom would be enough to bind her to me with loyalty. But sacrifice, I learned, does not always inspire gratitude. Sometimes it breeds entitlement. What I thought was love, she saw as weakness. What I gave freely, she accepted as her right, not as my gift. And while I thought I was building companionship, she was quietly learning just how much power she held over the life I had given her. Still, in those early days, I believed in her. I told myself that peace had finally come, that the storms of my past were behind me. I thought my stepwife would be my final chapter, the person who would sit with me when the house grew quiet and the years grew heavy. I thought my sacrifices had bought me loyalty. I thought wrong. Betrayal never storms into a house with a trumpet. It tiptoes in quietly, leaving signs that a man desperate for peace tries to ignore. At first, I noticed only little changes. My stepwife, once eager to sit with me and ask about my day, began taking long phone calls in other rooms. She said it was her friends, her family, errands to arrange. Her voice lowered when I came near, and she would smile in a way that didn't reach her eyes when I asked who she was speaking to. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that nothing was wrong. Then came the absences. She left the house more often, always with an excuse ready: shopping, meeting an old friend, checking on a cousin. The trips grew longer, stretching late into the evening, and when she returned, she was restless, distracted, as if her mind had been left behind somewhere else. I sat in the quiet of the house, the clock ticking too loudly, telling myself not to doubt her. After all, hadn't I given her everything? Hadn't I built a life where she never had to want for anything? Surely, I thought, she had no reason to betray me. But the signs grew harder to ignore. My driver, the man I trusted with my keys and my safety, began acting differently too. Once polite, reserved, and respectful, he grew bold. He lingered too long in the house when he dropped her off. He looked at me not with deference, but with a strange confidence, as though he carried a secret that gave him power over me. Sometimes I caught a smirk on his face, quickly hidden when our eyes met. It was subtle, but it stung. I brushed it off at first, convincing myself I was imagining things. Age can make a man question his instincts, and I told myself I was being paranoid. I had married for peace, not suspicion, and I clung to that peace even when the cracks appeared. I didn't want to be the kind of man who searched through phone records or demanded explanations. I wanted to be the husband who trusted, the husband who believed. So I stayed silent. But silence is its own kind of betrayal. By ignoring the signs, I betrayed myself. Each night when she slipped away with excuses, each time the driver lingered with smugness, I told myself it was nothing. Yet my heart felt the truth pressing against it, whispering that the woman I had trusted and the man I had paid were slipping beyond loyalty. Still, I held back, because admitting it aloud would mean my sacrifices had been wasted, my trust misplaced, my dignity ignored. The distance grew wider. Meals once shared in warmth became quiet affairs, where her eyes stayed on her phone more than on me. She laughed at jokes I wasn't part of, smiled at messages I didn't read, and carried a lightness when she left the house that vanished as soon as she stepped back inside. My driver's boldness grew, too. He no longer waited by the car like an employee. He strolled into the house, joked too freely, moved with a familiarity that gnawed at me. I told myself to wait, to observe, to be patient. But patience without action only allowed their confidence to grow. I was a man standing in his own house, yet beginning to feel like a stranger. The betrayal had not yet spoken its name, but its shadow filled every corner. And though I stayed silent, I knew deep down that the truth was coming. A truth I was not ready to face, but one I could no longer deny. The truth does not always explode. Sometimes it reveals itself in the simplest, cruelest ways. For months, I had carried suspicion in silence, convincing myself that my mind was playing tricks, that loyalty still lived inside the woman I married and the man I employed. But betrayal, no matter how carefully hidden, always leaves traces. And one evening, when the air was too still and the walls seemed to hold their breath, I stumbled into the proof that tore away the last of my denial. I had returned home earlier than usual. My stepwife believed I would be out for the night, attending a meeting that was canceled at the last minute. The house was dim, only the faint light from the living room spilling into the hallway. I walked in quietly, not expecting anything except perhaps to surprise her with my presence. But as I moved closer, voices drifted into the air, low, intimate, familiar. My wife's laughter, soft and playful, mixed with a tone I recognized instantly. My driver. For a moment, I froze. My heart pounded against my ribs as if trying to escape the truth it already knew. I stepped closer, careful not to make a sound, and peered through the doorway. And there it was, the sight no husband should ever have to see. My stepwife, sitting close beside him, her hand brushing his arm, her smile the kind I had not seen directed at me in years. The driver leaned toward her, confident, his body language bold, his presence in my house no longer that of an employee, but of something far more intimate. They did not see me at first. They were too lost in each other, too certain that I was far away, too arrogant to believe they could ever be caught. I stood there, hidden in the shadows, my fists clenched, my breathing shallow. It was not just the betrayal of love I saw. It was the betrayal of trust, of loyalty, of dignity. The woman I had given comfort and security. The man I had paid and fed. Both mocking me in the heart of my own home. When she finally noticed me, her smile dropped, but not into guilt, into irritation, as though I had interrupted something she felt entitled to. My driver straightened in his seat, his smirk fading into a stiff silence, but his eyes did not carry shame. Instead, they carried defiance, as though he believed he had taken something from me that could never be reclaimed. The audacity of it cut deeper than the act itself. I said nothing in that moment. My throat was too tight, my heart too heavy. I turned and walked away, but each step felt like fire burning through my chest. The walls I had built with years of sacrifice, the roof I had provided, the accounts I had opened in trust, all of it mocked me in that single discovery. I was betrayed by the woman I loved and the man I trusted. Betrayed under my own roof, in the silence of a house I had paid for. That night, I did not sleep. I sat awake, replaying the scene in my mind, feeling the humiliation press harder than the betrayal. They had not even tried to hide their affair well. They believed I was blind, powerless, irrelevant. To them, I was nothing but an old man whose sacrifices no longer mattered. And that, more than the affair itself, was what shattered me. The ease with which they dismissed my worth. But in the ashes of that discovery, something else began to grow. Not despair, not rage, but resolve. I had seen the truth, and now I could no longer stay silent. If they thought I was powerless, they had forgotten the one thing that mattered most. Every luxury they flaunted still rested on my foundation. Discovery alone can break a man, but insult turns the break into fire. After that night when I caught them together, I carried my silence like a shield. I wanted to see what they would do when confronted not with words, but with my presence. Would they deny it? Would they hide? Would they show even a shred of shame? For days, I watched them move around me as if nothing had happened, laughing in whispers, exchanging glances, pretending the air was not poisoned with betrayal. Their arrogance was a knife they twisted daily. But the blade sank deepest the night she finally spoke the words that turned my humiliation into a cold decision. It was late, and the house felt heavier than usual. She had been out again, gone for hours, with excuses that no longer mattered. When she returned, I asked no questions. I had no need. My silence alone was enough to show that I knew. But silence, to her, was weakness. She mistook my quiet for surrender, my patience for defeat. And so, when an argument broke over something trivial, a misplaced item, a forgotten task, she unleashed the cruelty she had carried all along. She stood in the living room, her voice sharp, her eyes blazing not with guilt, but with contempt. And then she spat out the words that I will never forget. "Sleep on the floor like a dog. That's all you're worth now." For a moment, the world around me blurred. Those words hit harder than the betrayal I had witnessed with my own eyes. To cheat was one thing. To strip me of dignity openly, to reduce me to less than human in the house I built, was another. She did not see me as her husband, not even as a man. She saw me as a burden, a joke, a relic of age that could be discarded at will. And in that moment, the weight of every sacrifice I had ever made crashed down on me, mocked by the very woman who had benefited from them all. The floor. A dog. That was what I had become in her eyes. I thought of the nights I had stayed awake working, the years of savings I had poured into this home, the countless ways I had shielded her from struggle. I thought of the trust I had given her, the accounts I had placed in her hands, the loyalty I had never questioned. And now she dared to strip me of dignity, to force humiliation onto me as though it were her right. I looked at her then, really looked at her, and saw not the woman I thought I had married, but a stranger filled with greed, arrogance, and betrayal. I realized she was not ashamed of her affair. She felt powerful because of it. She believed she held control, that my silence proved my weakness. And my driver, the man I had paid, the man I had trusted, now moved in the house with the same arrogance, emboldened by her cruelty. But what she forgot, what he never understood, was that the house, The accounts, the very life they enjoyed, were not built by her or him. They were built by me. The money in her hands, the roof over her head, the credit cards she swiped with ease, all of it bore my signature, my name, my sweat. They could betray me as a man, but they could not erase me as the foundation of their comfort. That night, as I lay awake, I felt the sting of her insult harden into resolve. She told me to sleep on the floor like a dog. Instead, I decided she would wake up one morning with nothing. No money, no comfort, no foundation. She had forgotten who held the real power, but I would remind her. Not with words, not with anger, but with silence and action. If she wanted me on the floor, then I would take the ground out from under her. What betrayal blinds people to is the very foundation they stand on. My stepwife thought she had cornered me with her affair, her cruelty, her insults. She believed she could strip me of dignity and leave me powerless, as though age had stolen from me everything that mattered. But she forgot the one truth that would become her downfall. Every luxury she flaunted, every dollar she spent, every card she swiped, every bill that was paid, it all came from me. I was the architect of her comfort. I was the reason she never had to worry about rent, utilities, or groceries. I was the signature behind every check that cleared, the name on every account that kept her lifestyle afloat. The clothes in her wardrobe were purchased with my money. The phone she used to whisper betrayal into was paid for by me. Even the driver she betrayed me with was on my payroll, his salary drawn directly from the accounts I controlled. The irony was sharp. She used the life I built to destroy me, forgetting that the very tools of her betrayal were mine to take away. For years, I had trusted her with access. I gave her cards linked to my accounts, believing she would use them with respect. I let her have the passwords and the freedom to spend, thinking that trust would breed loyalty. But trust in the wrong hands becomes a weapon, and loyalty, once lost, leaves only arrogance. She mistook access for ownership. She believed comfort was her right, not my gift, and that mistake would be her undoing. I remembered every detail of our finances. I knew the banks, the account numbers, the transfers, the investments. I had built my life on discipline, and discipline does not age. She may have thought she had drained me of relevance, but I had never surrendered the true power. Control of money is control of freedom, and she had forgotten that every piece of her so-called independence rested on my foundation. The driver, too, moved with arrogance, as though he had won some prize. But he was nothing without the salary I paid him. Without me, he was just another man without work, without stability, without the means to even fuel the car he drove. And when the accounts went dark, when the cards declined, when the roof above her head became threatened, he would vanish, because men like him feed on opportunity, not loyalty. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how blind she had become to reality. She looked at me and saw an old man she could humiliate. She looked at him and saw youth, thrill, rebellion. But she never looked at the foundation. She never looked at the one who built everything, the one who had sacrificed decades to make her life effortless. She had forgotten the most important truth of all. She was standing on ground I had paved, and if I chose, I could take it all away. That realization gave me strength. I no longer felt like a broken husband. I felt like a man holding the quiet power of choice. She thought she had taken everything from me when she mocked me, but she had only reminded me of what I still controlled, and in that control lay my revenge. Not loud, not messy, not filled with shouting or anger, silent, sharp, and absolute. When humiliation burns a man to his core, he either breaks or he sharpens. That night, as I lay awake replaying her insult, "Sleep on the floor like a dog," I decided I would not break. I would sharpen. My revenge would not come from raised fists or shouted arguments. It would come from silence, precision, and the very thing she took for granted: money. If betrayal was the weapon she used, then control of the accounts would be the weapon I mastered. I began by gathering every detail I had ever entrusted to her. I knew where she banked because it was the same institutions I used. I knew the accounts she accessed because they were linked to mine. Over the years, she had grown lazy, assuming I had given her full control, but she never realized that the true authority always remained with me. The statements still arrived in my name. The online portals still required my master access. The house, the car, even the so-called joint accounts, all of it still tied back to the man she called an old dog. I retrieved the documents quietly, pulling out files I had stored away long before she entered my life. I reviewed passwords, account numbers, backup authorizations. Everything she thought she owned was nothing more than a branch of the tree I had planted. She may have picked the fruit, but I still held the roots. And roots, when cut off, leave nothing but rot above the surface. The plan was simple, but devastating. While she slept, dreaming her arrogant dreams beside the man who chauffeured her betrayal, I would log in and empty her accounts. Every dollar she thought belonged to her would be transferred into secure private holdings under my sole control. The credit cards she waved around so freely would be canceled. The accounts she checked with careless confidence would show zeros by morning. Her comfort would evaporate overnight, leaving her standing in the ruins of her arrogance. But I was not reckless. I consulted quietly with the lawyer who had stood by me through business and property dealings. I did not tell him the story of betrayal, only the practical truth. These accounts were mine to control, the assets mine to move, the authority mine to exercise. He confirmed what I already knew. Everything I planned was legal, every step airtight. I was not stealing from her. I was taking back what was always mine. I rehearsed it in my mind, step by step. I pictured myself moving through the house while she slept. I imagined the glow of the computer screen, the quiet clicking of keys, the steady transfer of funds. I planned where I would move the money, how I would secure it so she could never claw it back. I even planned my exit, the suitcase I would carry, the place I would disappear to once her downfall was complete. Every detail mattered, because revenge without discipline is only rage. And I wanted more than rage. I wanted finality. By the time I closed my eyes that night, I no longer felt humiliated. I felt calm, focused, ready. My wife thought I was powerless. My driver thought I was blind, but both had forgotten the truth. Silence is not weakness. Silence is waiting, and my waiting was over. The night I chose to act was like any other for her. She returned home late, carrying the perfume of places she would not name, her eyes lit with the false glow of a woman living a double life. She spoke little, barely glanced at me, and went straight to bed. My driver had already dropped her off and vanished into the night, smug in his silence, confident in the power he thought he now held. To them, I was invisible. To them, I was irrelevant. And yet, they slept comfortably, not knowing that their downfall had already begun. The house was silent when I rose from my chair. I moved slowly, each step deliberate, careful not to disturb her sleep. I had prepared everything earlier, the documents neatly arranged, the laptop charged, the accounts ready to be accessed. I carried the calmness of a man who had nothing left to lose and everything to take back. For years, I had given them comfort. Tonight, I would take it all away. I sat at the desk, the dim glow of the screen casting light across the room. My hands did not tremble. They moved with precision, typing passwords I had memorized long ago, entering codes that only I knew. The first account opened, and with a few clicks, her balance drained into my private holdings. The numbers on her screen would vanish by morning, replaced with nothing but zeros. I moved on to the next, and then the next, each one falling like dominoes, her savings, her checking, her credit, gone. What she thought was her independence disappeared into silence, erased by the very man she mocked. With each transfer, I felt a weight lift from me. The humiliation she had forced on me, telling me to sleep on the floor like a dog, was replaced by the satisfaction of control. She could take my dignity in words, but she could not touch the power I held in silence. The same hands she mocked as weak now typed with precision, dismantling her entire life in a matter of hours. By the time I finished, the account stood empty. The credit cards were canceled. The loans, once secured by my name, were revoked. What remained was debt, overdrafts, and a woman who would wake up to nothing. I leaned back in my chair and let out a long breath, not of anger, but of relief. It was done. I packed a suitcase quietly, placing only what I needed inside: clothes, documents, the essentials of a man who no longer planned to return. I moved through the house one last time, looking at the walls I had built, the furniture I had bought, the life I had funded. None of it meant anything now. It was a stage where betrayal had played its part, and I had no reason to stay in the ruins of that performance. Before leaving, I stood by the doorway of the bedroom. She lay there sleeping peacefully, unaware that her world had been stripped bare. I felt no urge to wake her, no need to shout or confront. Her punishment would not come from my words. It would come from the silence of her bank accounts, the emptiness of her cards, the betrayal of a driver who would vanish as quickly as he had appeared once the money was gone. That was justice, not in noise, but in absence. And so I stepped out into the night, my suitcase in hand, my heart steady. I did not look back. The house behind me was no longer my home. It was a monument to betrayal, and I had no need to linger there any longer. As the cool air hit my face, I felt something I had not felt in years: freedom. Morning always brings truth. And that morning, as the sun crawled through the curtains of the bedroom I had left behind, my stepwife awoke to find her empire reduced to dust. She reached for her phone, as she always did, scrolling through messages and checking balances before even rising from bed. But this time, the screen showed what she had never imagined: zeros where there had once been numbers, overdrafts where there had once been comfort. Her credit cards declined, one after another, when she tried to use them. The life she thought she controlled had vanished overnight, and in its place was panic. The first hour was confusion. She thought it was a mistake, a glitch in the system. She called the bank, her voice frantic, her confidence already slipping. But the bank confirmed it. Her accounts were empty, her access revoked. The security she flaunted to her friends, the money she boasted about, had been moved beyond her reach. Her voice cracked, turning from anger to fear, as she demanded explanations she could not receive. For the first time she realized she had no control. The second hour was anger. She stormed through the house, her footsteps echoing against the walls, shouting my name, demanding I explain myself. But the rooms answered only with silence. My suitcase was gone, my presence erased, my silence louder than her screams. She cursed me, cursed the life I had given her, cursed the driver who now looked at her not with loyalty, but with unease. Because he, too, knew the truth. His place beside her was built on money that no longer existed. By midday, the driver was gone. Men like him never stay when the well runs dry. He vanished as quickly as he had come, leaving her alone in the ruins of what she had built on betrayal. She called his phone again and again, but each call went unanswered, her desperation growing heavier with each silence. The man she had chosen over me was nothing without the life I had funded, and when that life disappeared, so did he. Neighbors began to notice. They saw her pacing outside, frantic, her car repossessed, her voice cracking with rage. Relatives heard whispers of what had happened, and soon the gossip spread. They had admired her for her comfort, envied her for her lifestyle, but now they mocked her downfall. To them, she was no longer the woman who lived in luxury. She was the woman left penniless, abandoned, betrayed by the very man she betrayed me with. The fallout was not just financial. It was social, emotional, humiliating. She had built her arrogance on the illusion of security, but when the illusion collapsed, so did she. She begged banks for answers, but the truth was clear. Her power had never been hers. It had been mine, and I had taken it back. And through it all, I was nowhere to be found. My absence was the deepest wound of all. She could not scream at me, could not argue, could not beg. I had vanished with the silence of a man who no longer cared. Her punishment was not just poverty. It was the emptiness of knowing that the man she mocked as an old dog had left her with nothing but the shadow of her own betrayal. When betrayal collapses, its echoes last longer than the act itself. In the days after I vanished, my stepwife's world turned into rubble. She went from a woman who strutted through life with arrogance to someone who could not even buy bread without shame. Every store she walked into, every swipe of a card, every glance from the clerks became another reminder of how far she had fallen. The woman who once flaunted luxury now faced rejection in the smallest of errands. Each decline of her card was not just financial, it was humiliation replayed again and again in public. She tried to salvage her dignity by reaching out to relatives, but families remember everything. They remembered the arrogance with which she once looked down on them, boasting about the life I had given her but claiming it as her own. Now, when she asked for help, they turned her away, some with pity, others with coldness. Whispers filled the air about her affair, about her betrayal, about the way I had left her with nothing. The humiliation was no longer private. It was her identity. She could not escape it because it followed her everywhere. At home, the silence grew unbearable. Without me, the house was nothing but empty walls. Without the driver, who had fled the moment the money dried up, she was left alone with her regret. The man she had chosen vanished into thin air, proving he had never been hers but only the shadow of opportunity. She sat in the same living room where she once laughed at me, where she once gave her loyalty to another man, and now she sat with no one at all. The walls that once held betrayal now echoed with her despair. She came looking for me eventually. I knew she would. She knocked on the doors of people I once called friends, asking if they had heard from me. She begged bankers for information they would not give. She went to places I used to frequent, hoping I would appear. But I had made sure my disappearance was complete. I had taken what I needed and built a life far from her reach. To her, I was not just gone. I was untouchable. And that was the true aftermath. She had betrayed me, humiliated me, mocked me as an old man meant to sleep on the floor like a dog. But when the dust settled, she was the one on the ground, crawling through the ruins of her own arrogance. She had thought herself powerful, but her power had always been borrowed. She had thought herself secure, but her security had always been mine. And when I chose to take it back, she discovered the truth. Without me, she was nothing. As for me, I walked into the aftermath not as a broken man, but as a free one. I ate meals that tasted of dignity, slept in beds that were mine alone, and breathed air no longer tainted by betrayal. I had carried humiliation for too long, but in reclaiming what was mine, I reclaimed myself. She lived in the ruins of betrayal. I lived in the peace of justice. Justice, when it comes, does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it arrives in the quiet choices of a man who has had enough. For me, justice was not found in shouting at her betrayal, nor in striking back with anger. It was found in reclaiming control, in taking back the very foundation she stood on, and in walking away while she was left in the ruins of her own arrogance. That was my victory, not loud, but absolute. I built a new life for myself, far from the house that had turned into a cage of humiliation. I settled in a place where no one knew me as the man betrayed, where no one saw me as the husband mocked, where I could live simply and with dignity. Each meal I ate tasted better because it was free of insult. Each bed I slept in felt warmer because no one had told me to lie on the floor like a dog. I no longer lived in the shadow of her cruelty. I lived in the light of my freedom. Meanwhile, her downfall was complete. The driver who had whispered false promises into her ear vanished the moment money left her hands. Friends who once envied her lifestyle now mocked her in whispers. Family who once tolerated her arrogance now rejected her pleas for help. She was left alone, penniless, with nothing but the echo of her betrayal. The same lips that once called me an old man now trembled with regret. The same woman who believed she had stripped me of dignity now lived without any of her own. I did not need to see her suffering to feel peace. I did not need to stand in her presence to know she had lost everything. The silence of her absence in my life was enough. The knowledge that she woke every day in the ruins of what she had destroyed was enough. She had betrayed me with a driver. She had mocked me as worthless. But in the end, it was her worth that vanished, her comfort that dissolved, her future that collapsed. Justice, for me, was not revenge dressed in rage. It was dignity reclaimed, peace restored, freedom earned. She gave me humiliation, but I gave her emptiness. She mocked my age, but I reminded her that wisdom is sharper than youth. She tried to reduce me to the floor, but I reduced her to nothing. Final thought. She betrayed me with a driver, but it was my signature that drove her into nothing. She told me to sleep on the floor like a dog. But I walked away as a man who left her crawling in the ruins of her greed.